Thank you, MG. I finally purchased the data set needed for my machine learning projects. Okay, so what? These are the receipts, and I paid with your credit card. Again? Yes. How my non-physical cloned version can use my credit card? What? Forget nothing. So what are you up to now? Actually, some of these data sets are coming real time, and some of them will be ingested in batch format, like once a week. So I'm wondering to know, how can I trigger my machine learning pipelines for inferencing or retraining continuously as soon as these data sets are ingested? Okay, so what services you're using for ingesting this data? I'm using Azure Data Factory. Okay, you can easily trigger your machine learning pipelines using Azure Data Factory. Easy. Oh, awesome. Could you please show me how? You have to pay these back first. Okay, let's go. Hello everyone, this is MG, and as always, welcome back to another video which I'm going to show you how you can trigger your Azure Machine Learning pipelines as a step within your Azure Data Factory pipelines. Let's check it out. Before we start, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell icon so you will get notified for the next video. Thank you. There's a well-known fact that you don't have always all data sets prepared and ready for you to train your machine learning models. But in reality, all those data sets are coming from some specific sources. Potentially, there are some data engineering efforts that has been done by yourself or other team members to ingest the data for you, do some preparation, transformation, and then potentially publish the data needed for reporting, or that can be leveraged as an input for the start of your machine learning project. You can grab that transformed data to potentially start featureization step and come up with subset of data set needed for training your models. So the question is, how can I align my machine learning project within this flow? Well, obviously the data is coming from a data source, get prepared, transformed, and when I do have my machine learning project ready, for instance, I have trained a model that is ready to do some classification or regression, I do need to automate that prediction process as soon as these data sets are coming in, because these are the inputs coming to my model. So I sort of need to integrate my solution, or machine learning solution, to this data flow to make it sort of predictive analytics. Now, before jumping to that integration phase, the initial question here would be, what is Azure Data Factory, as we discussed, and how it comes to this picture? Well, Azure Data Factory is the platform that solves such data scenarios. So it's a it's an Azure cloud-based ETL and data integration service that allows you to create data-driven workflows for orchestrating data movements and transforming data at a scale, even with no code solution. So you will see Azure Data Factory portal, I'll showcase you shortly, that with just drag and drop, I will be able to ingest data from a variety of different sources like databases, on-prem, on cloud, different cloud providers, tabular SQL databases, grabbing the data, do some transformations on fly, and push it back to, let's say, another database on Azure, or data lake, just simply over a disk, or different sort of sync types that I can have the data there and potentially be used for my machine learning project. And then we will see that how within ingestion, at the same time using Data Factory, I will be able to orchestrate and trigger my machine learning pipelines, which I register them in Azure ML. So now we understand a high level overview of what is the data scenario here, what is the flow of the data journey that it comes until we use machine learning. And then let's figure out how Azure Data Factory look like, and then how we can integrate Azure Data Factory with Azure Machine Learning to trigger our machine learning pipeline there. There you go. Here is my Azure Data Factory portal. Well, you can just simply create this using Azure portal or Bicep, any template code. So you can just simply go to your Azure portal and just type Azure Data Factory and create a new workspace for yourself. It's pretty simple. I have already done so, did some investigations here, and then just quickly show you how it looks like. So if I go to other section, you will see that with just a drag and drop, I was able to actually create some pipelines. For example, these are some other pipelines I previously utilized and executed them for doing some sort of transformation, data ingestion. For example, here I have a pipeline called transformation. So I'm transforming some data from a specific source on fly. Let me click on that. You'll see that I have some data set coming in. I'm joining them based on a specific key, modifying the table, filtering, selecting some columns, and push it back to actually a database or a data lake. So I'm not going to go through all the details of Azure Data Factory. That's a whole separate topic by itself. And there are a ton of references, resources you can be hands-on with and grab a little bit more info about the capabilities of this platform. But I'm just trying to show you in high level what you can achieve and what is the purpose here. So I can create a pipeline that will connect to some sources. For example, if you want to define a source, you define a data set. And you can see here all different sources. I can grab the data or push the data back as my destination to push, let's say, the transform data. You can see I can just call an HTTP, let's say API to grab the data, or from MySQL, Oracle, and SAP, all different connections. You can filter this out here and check it out by yourself. So now, let's say I am going to create a pipeline to ingest the data, and as soon as the data is ingested, I want to trigger my training pipeline in Azure Machine Learning. So what I did, I already created Azure Machine Learning pipeline, and let me show you how. So Azure Data Factory pipeline. So just simply click on these three dots here. You can create a new pipeline, and then here you can with just drag and drop create any components in this data engineering pipeline. For example, you want to copy the data, okay, drag and drop copy activity here. Or you want to do some transformation, do the data flow. Do you want to trigger some Synapse, let's say notebook or a Spark job definition in Synapse? Then just drag and drop it here. So when you run this pipeline, you will copy the data and then run the notebook in Synapse. And you can see here there's a machine learning component, and we do have machine learning pipeline triggering mechanism here defining Azure Data Factory. So I'm going to delete this pipeline because I've already created one, and you can change the name of your pipeline. So that's how I did. I created this pipeline. I named it as AML or Azure ML. And you can see here I am ingesting the data. So for this simple example, I just use copy activity. How I did it, in move and transform, you drag and drop the copy. I drag and drop it here, and you can see here you need to specify where is the data source and where you want to put the data. So my source is just a data lake as an example. If you want to define your source, you have to click on new. Again, I told you you can define, for example, your data is coming from blob. Just click on it and get the connectivity. You just need to put your credentials and good to go. So mine here I have already defined, and I'm not going to create it again. And you have to make sure your sequential credentials is secure when you enter them. And for the sync, the same thing. I have specified a place that I want to dump the data back to another data lake, and regardless of the use case, what is the data, just showing you an example how we can define the source and the sync. And let me show you actually, if I open it, you can see that here's an ADLS Gen 2 that I want to push the data. I can test the connection. Well, the credentials I entered is working well, it's connected. And I'm specifying where I want to put the data in that data lake. That's the file path, and bunch of more settings you can specify within your connectivity when you want to push the data to this destination or sync. So going back to my pipeline, what I'm trying to do, let's say this is a data set ingestion, and as soon as the data is pushed to that data lake, you want to trigger this machine learning pipeline. And I want to show you what this machine learning pipeline is. Consider this as a training pipeline that I have defined in Azure ML that I will show you quickly. How did I grab this? I showed you. In machine learning, just grab and drop, drag,
and drop it here, and you just connect on success box here to machine learning step. That means if that data ingestion step is succeeded, then trigger this machine learning pipeline. Then let's figure out what is this machine learning pipeline before I execute it and show you how I actually put the settings for this step. So here's my Azure Machine Learning workspace, and if you remember, we created a video for Azure Machine Learning pipeline, and in that video we went through a deep dive conversation of what is Azure ML pipeline, that I used it actually to use the very famous example of taxi data. I think it was an open source data set we grabbed to predict what's going to be the potential price of a fare or the fare of a taxi. So I want to use that pipeline, and I strongly recommend you, if you have not watched that video, make sure you watch that video first to have a better understanding of what is Azure ML pipeline. So add that video on the top right side of this video and also in the video description as well. So here's the pipeline we created together in that video, and we registered that pipeline, which is NYC taxi tutorial. And if I show you the details, you'll see that this pipeline, which is an Azure Machine Learning pipeline, will grab some data inputs, clean them, merge them, filtering, normalization, transformation, train and test split, and finally, it is triggering auto ML in Azure ML to create a regression model or train a regression model. So you can see that this pipeline has been already registered as an endpoint. You can see the REST endpoint URL on the right side. So you can trigger it from here. If I just click on submit, it will trigger all this pipeline end to end. You can even schedule it. But here what we're going to do, we're going to trigger this pipeline from Data Factory. So because Data Factory know when the data going to be ingested, then after that trigger this pipeline, because for example, these data sets are refreshed by Azure Data Factory, so grab them and then execute this pipeline. So let me go back to my Azure Data Factory. We already drag and drop this machine learning step execute pipeline here, and when you go to the general setting of this, when you click on this, you will see these settings here. You can just change the name here, bunch of more specific settings like timeout, how many times we want to retry if it fails. But if I go to the setting, that's the place that you'll have to link this step to an Azure ML workspace. So if you haven't done this part, you have to click on new, and then from here you have to choose the subscription that you have your Azure ML, and then your name of Azure ML workspace will be appeared here. So you just click on it and the connection is there for you. So I already did this, so I want to cancel, and if I test the connection, it should show you that my Data Factory is successfully connected to Azure ML workspace, that I have the NYC taxi pipeline. But most likely you will see this part with a red flag and say that connection failed. And here is the reason. You have to give Azure Data Factory permission to get access to your Azure ML workspace. How you can do so? Well, each Azure Data Factory has a manage ID. So you need to go to your Azure ML and say that, hey Azure ML, this is the ID of my Data Factory, and if it wants to connect to you, get the permission. So you need to define an RBAC or role-based access control for that manage ID of Azure Data Factory to get access to your Azure ML. Let me show you how. So first you need to know, of course you have created an Azure ML workspace, so let me show you how you can give access to this Data Factory. So here is my Azure Machine Learning workspace, and if you click on access control, just click on add role assignment. And for instance here I want to give contributor role to my Azure Data Factory for getting access to this workspace. So I click on contributor, click on next. You need to select manage identity because we want to select Azure Data Factory to get access to ML workspace. And then I clicked on select member. So you can see that different services, they have their own manage ID, and Data Factory is here. Just click on it. And you can see all my Data Factories has been selected here. The one that I'm working with is the third one. So if I click on it and then click on assign, now my Data Factory has access to Azure ML. So make sure you do not skip this step. So I did this already. That's why the connection is successful. And then Okay, you have to tell Azure Data Factory that which pipeline inside this Azure ML workspace you want to trigger. The good news is, as soon as you create this connection to your ML workspace and select it here, just click on pipeline endpoint ID or pipeline ID, you will see that Azure Data Factory will list all the pipelines that you have registered before in Azure ML. So I didn't really type anything here. It knows that there's an NYC Taxi pipeline in my Azure ML workspace, which is this one. And you can see the name automatically got appeared here. And the ID of the pipeline has chosen by itself. That's it. If you have a parameter for this pipeline to run, you can just add it here, but I don't have any parameter for here, so I'll skip this. And that's it. So now I can run this node data engineering pipeline or data factory pipeline, which is an orchestrated tool for ETL and data engineering, to not only ingest the data from the source, and then as soon as the data is ingested, it will run my retraining pipeline that use AutoML in Azure Machine Learning. How can I run this pipeline? Well, if I click on debug, it will do a quick test and run everything, but you can also add trigger for this pipeline, which is ingestion plus training. So if I click on add trigger, you can trigger now or choose a trigger. So I want to create a new trigger, and you can see that I want to trigger based on a schedule, tumbling window, an event. Let's say something happened to a storage, trigger this, or some custom event. You can check this out, the documentation of this in detail, how you can trigger them, and you can specify a time, every 15 minutes run this pipeline. But here, let's just quickly manually trigger it to make sure after the copy activity is done, it should be able to execute my machine learning pipeline from Data Factory. So let's say trigger now. Let me first select the pipeline. Actually, I have to publish it first, so I would be able to trigger it. But if I click on debug, it will also run this pipeline for quick test. So I clicked on debug, and let's see what's gonna happen. So you can see that my data ingestion, the first step is queued. It's gonna take a couple of seconds to get started, and then we should be able to see that my machine learning pipeline also need to be executed and triggered. Let's wait for a couple of seconds. There you go. I pause the recording, and after just a couple of seconds, you'll see that my copy data is done, succeeded, and then my machine learning execution pipeline is also triggered. That means now in my Azure ML, that NYC Taxi pipeline should be running right now. Let's check it out. So I'll go to this. Let me go to pipelines. Let me click on refresh. There you go. You'll see that one just completed and created by service principal. That means Azure Data Factory actually executed this pipeline. And if I click on it, it should show me that all these steps has been running successfully, and now I have a fresh model that has been trained by fresh data without any manual efforts here, and I was able to automate this process, synchronize with my data ingestion and data engineering process that I defined them in Azure Data Factory. The example that I created here honestly is very simple. I just wanted to show you the art of possibility here, but you can certainly define much more complex scenarios in your pipeline here, and with much more triggering mechanisms and conditions. For example, you can trigger your Databricks notebook here. I would suggest you check this out, all the capabilities and activities that you can have in Azure Data Factory pipeline, and you will see the real power that how you can really automate end-to-end process that we talked about, which is here, from all the way in just preparation, transformation, and on fly. We just triggered training pipeline, but you can trigger, let's say, inferencing pipeline, or a pipeline that does batch prediction. So as soon as new data coming in, you have to trigger your batch prediction pipeline to do some predictions based on new input features coming in, and then publish the results to be accessible by your, let's say, Power BI dashboard or data consumer, or people, stakeholders who would like to know the final results, which is built on the top of huge efforts of data engineering plus machine learning that now in Data Factory that can be integrated together. And that's all, and I hope you enjoyed the video.
Do all good you can in all ways you can, for all people you can, at all time you can, in all places you can, as long as ever you can. Take care, my friends, and we'll see you shortly next week.